Welcome everybody. Good evening. Great to see you all. I would like to start with a short story first, about, not quite as exciting as the one we just heard. About 9 months ago, I had the opportunity to see a company called Payback. Some of you would know these guys. Essentially, they are one of the largest loyalty card providers in Germany. And so I came to see this guy, Oliver, who at the time was responsible for business development and entrepreneurship. And for those of you who don't know what entrepreneurship actually means, large corporates, what they tend to do is they recruit employees from within in order to take charge of key initiatives in the organization. So these could be developing new products, these could be startups within the company, all this sort of stuff. So anyway, so I spoke to Oliver about entrepreneurship in Germany in general. And so we kind of came to the conclusion that it's not an easy country to become an entrepreneur. It's not really the mindset you'll find here. And so he said, you know, Markus, it's really interesting because when we started out building this program and we communicated it out to everyone, everybody wanted to be part of this because it's cool, it takes the company into the future, it's new, it's sexy, it's cutting edge, all this stuff. But then he said, we did something else. After we had communicated this, and I don't know how many people applied, but lots, he said, then we communicated back to them and we asked them, now would you be willing to sacrifice some of your fixed salary for a more flexible salary structure where some of your salary would be fixed still, but a lot of it might be just dependent on the success of the initiative that you're responsible for. And all of a sudden, hardly anybody was interested anymore. So this is not really surprising, of course, because we as humans, once we've got something, we don't really like to let go of it. It's a really, really difficult thing to do. So it's fully understandable, of course, that people wouldn't want to do it. But it kind of, I think, leads to a fundamental problem in our society, which is we don't really foster entrepreneurial mindsets. And not in Germany, there's many other countries as well, especially corporates, it doesn't matter where you look. They're not really made to foster entrepreneurial spirit. It's not their fault, it's just not what they're made of. They're made to manage existing revenues and products, but not really necessarily to be innovative. So this is a fundamental problem because if we look back into the old world, in the industrial society, a lot of the way things were structured was all around predictability, making up 5-year plans, thinking about the production over the next few years. But in the new digital world, everything changes fundamentally, where we need to become agile, fast thinking. We need to think on the spot and really adjust to a new situation extremely quickly. So what I want to do in this quick talk today is really just give you a little bit of an insight into my own experience around entrepreneurship. And I can tell you it wasn't an easy journey at all. So I started out, I used to live in Australia for about 10 years. I was also in the Silicon Valley, but I was always employed by somebody else. So I had, you know, fixed salary, holidays, social security, and all the sort of stuff that you typically have when you're employed by somebody. I always wanted to become an entrepreneur, but for some reason, the opportunity never really arose. Up until probably about 2.5 years ago, when all of a sudden I had this opportunity. And then as I started thinking about it, I started to freak out. I became almost paranoid. And I don't know whether you can sort of relate to this, but it became worse and worse. And you're making up stuff in your mind, which doesn't really make any sense. And I saw myself ending up under a bridge with a bottle of wine. And I thought, this is it. Life is over. I'm never going to do this. And this was the point where I decided, you cannot go on like this anymore. You need to have a reality check. So what I tend to do when I have reality checks, I take my dog, it's Linus here on the left-hand side, out for a walk. And so I took him out and started thinking about what my real situation was. Was there a reason to be paranoid? So I started thinking about the figures. How much money had I saved up? How many months could I sustain myself without making any money and all this sort of stuff? And it sounds very trivial, but you don't necessarily tend to do this a lot. And by just going down to objective figures and facts and thinking exactly what it would mean, and do I have a support net, all this sort of stuff, was probably a 90 minutes walk, but I came back and it was almost like the decision was made for me. I think I had about 15 months time, which was okay. And I thought this is enough for me to be able to start this business. And so I did. Now, so for me, one of the most important advices is really to have that reality check. But it's not just when you become paranoid about something. It's also, I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who think they're never going to go under. For some reason, they have this bias in their heads, and I don't know where it comes from, but it's so strong that they think, no matter, nothing is going to happen to me, I'm not going to run this business against the wall. But I saw quite a few who did anyways. And so again, on the flip side, it's also important to have that reality check when you think things are really easy and going well. So the other thing I want to talk about is what I always call the bipolarity of a startup. I didn't really fully know what I was getting myself into. So when I first started, okay, I had the reality check. I knew I had a little bit of money on the side to really be able to do this, but I didn't know really what it meant emotionally to be in this space. I mean, we talked about, or we heard about shrinks before. I mean, I sometimes think I really need one. When I'm at that point where Monday morning I get up and I think, oh, Jesus, what's happening with the cash flow and how difficult is it? And how am I going to sustain this and how am I going to survive this and all this stuff? So the ups and downs that you go through are just phenomenal. And I just didn't expect it. So, and the ups, of course, as well. And you almost become manic and you think everything is going hunky-dory and then something else happens and you go down again until the point where you look, Jesus, the cash flow is becoming really tough, which in late 2015, we were at a situation where I really thought we had to close the business, but then managed to get out of this. So now I want to talk about what kind of qualities you really need in order to survive this sort of stuff. And it's interesting because we run this big festival, so I always invite interesting speakers from all over the world to talk about certain things. And so Katya is actually a Russian lady who lives in Munich, and she's won, I think, the Olympic medal in synchronized swimming. And so I asked her to come up on stage and tell us her story, because you can imagine somebody who's been able to achieve such an extraordinary success, you know, they have to tell us, be able to tell a story. So she said, you know, it was really interesting. When I started out, I was by no means the most talented person. There were so many other people who were much better than me. But a lot of them just disappeared. There were some, as they became teenagers, they had boyfriends, and so others went away because they had to move away with their parents, whatever it was. But she said, I was the last man, or in this case, last woman standing. And she just kept on going, and she had this perseverance not to give up. And it was hard, and it was tough, and it was difficult. And like a startup, she went through ups and downs, but she eventually was up at the highest point. There's a really interesting talk, it's a TED Talk, which you can check if you like, by a lady called Angela Lee Duckworth, who is a professor of psychology who talks about grit. Now, grit is a really interesting and complex concept, I think, but I do believe it's kind of the combination of perseverance and passion, which is really, in this combination, what you need if you have a startup and you want to succeed in the long run. And she says very clearly, this is not a sprint, it's absolutely a marathon, and you have to stick through. And sometimes there will be times when you just don't want to keep going anymore. So, one of the things, if you don't have a shrink, it might be a good idea to have a friend who can really support you in this struggle. And let me tell you, I think, who was it? Elon Musk said it once. He said, if you want to look into an abyss, then become an entrepreneur. This is what it feels like. So find a friend who can relate to what you're going through. So I think it should be somebody who's either gone through a business, failed, or is still in a business, whatever it is, but he should understand what you're going through. I have this Australian mentor, if you like, who I always call when I get really miserable, and I say, well, I don't know how to keep going. And he said, and he says these nice things. He says, you know what, Markus, most people have no idea what you're going through. It's so difficult. And just this empathy and the relatedness that he brings across, just, I feel better already, and then you keep going. So you need these friends and mentors and drinks or whatever you wanna call them. So that's one thing. And now Ferran will like this because you can see which nationality this team has here. Another thing that's really important is the team, of course. And I want to point to a new quality of team spirit that's emerging more and more. And funnily enough, you can see it in football very clearly, but I do believe you can see it's represented in business, anywhere really. So back in 2008, there was, I think it was the Euro Cup in Austria and Switzerland. And as you were watching the teams, there was one team that really stood out. They played football like they were coming from another planet. And of course, these were the Spaniards who subsequently won the Euro Cup. But I think just watching them was just amazing. And so the way they played was which is now known as the tiki-taka, which is extremely dynamic, fast, agile play, and where not just one or two people are dominant, but actually the whole team plays together in an amazing kind of collaboration. And so there was a professor for, I think, mathematics in the US who used mathematics and networking theory to understand what was exactly going on. And he sort of compared the different teams, and he said, if you had used this before, you probably almost could have predicted that the Spaniards would win it. The Germans subsequently took over some of the elements of the game and then won in 2014. Sorry, Ferran, I have to say that. But yeah, so that's the kind of spirit that we also need, is this togetherness, where it's not just one leader, but leaders pop up depending on what the area of expertise might be. So they might change. It doesn't always have to be the same person. I think I can skip that. Another thing that's really important, which we do as a team a lot, is kill the elephants before they become elephants. So elephant, essentially, I think the English used it first, is something that becomes bigger and bigger when you don't talk about it. So it's these emotional conflicts that get really strong and annoying, but people for some reason don't want to talk about it because they're either scared of the conflict or whatever else. So it's so important to bring this stuff on the table, because otherwise they become elephants and then things become messy. It's a bit like in a marriage, really. Another thing I want to point out is think like an API. Now, some of you would know what an API is, application programming interface. But we can transfer this wisdom, if you like, to humans and to organizations. In the old world, if you think about big corporates, they still kind of like castles. Nobody gets ever in, it's like it's them and us. In the new world, this changes entirely, where an API is like a bridge which you're building into the external world. So we're talking about ecosystem thinking. And Facebook already did this in 2008 when they opened up their API to external developers. And so there was a win-win-win for basically, of course, the developers, because they could take advantage of the reach of Facebook to create their apps, which were then put on the platform. It was good for the users because there was more content, it was more interesting and dynamic. And of course, for Facebook, it was good because they had more usage, and then as a result of this, more advertising dollars. But it's that sort of ecosystem thinking that's really important. Elon Musk came out about, I don't know whether you remember, a couple of years ago, where he said basically we're going to open up or release our patents to good faith usage. But what that meant was essentially, he said, we're not going to sue our competitors or anybody who's using our technology. And the reasoning behind, I mean, it was a really big PR thing for him. But apart from that, I think the logic behind it made sense, because what he was saying is only, I think of all cars today, only 1% are electric cars. So we need to collaborate and work together with our competitors and other companies to make sure that we're going to succeed in this. And I'm at the end of this presentation. I know you're really tired, and I didn't even finish my beer, so I want to do this. I just want to quickly point to our festival, which is funny enough, is actually this week on Thursday in Backstage. So if you're interested, let me know. We've got a startup ticket. You can just use this code. It's lots of international speakers from all over the world covering lots of different topics. Thank you very much.
There's of course room for questions.
Okay, first question. I'm afraid I'm not aware what here the X is. Could you maybe elaborate what's the topic of your festival?
Yeah, so essentially we're an innovation festival, but we decided to do it differently. Most conferences that you typically go to, like business conferences, they're quite dull and boring. And so we decided we wanted to do something which is much more emotional. So we're bringing together lots of different disciplines. We make it emotional by choosing we use the Chinese horoscope, and we sort of change the animal obviously every year. This year is the year of the rooster, which is all about entrepreneurship, courage, going forward, not taking no for an answer, taking risks. And so what we do is we charge the whole festival with the rooster spirit. So we even have a US farm kind of design on the stage, and we have actual roosters there as well, which you can take selfies with if you would like. So we do fun stuff and crazy shit like this, but we get lots of speakers from Australia, from America. We have the founder of Couchsurfing and lots of other people who just run workshops and do presentations, just in a different and I guess more alternative way. Plus we have that sort of combination of tech festival and mindfulness.